Hi everyone, welcome back to DFTW. Today, let's talk about one of the strangest, most Trump-style geopolitical stories you'll hear almost every day this year: the United States and Greenland. Yes, that Greenland. Ice, glaciers, dog sleds, and so on. Suddenly, it becomes the flashpoint of global power politics. So the whole thing kicks off the way many Trump stories do. It starts with a hallway interview on Air Force One. Trump loves doing this. Walking down the narrow aisle, half chatting, half ranting, casually dropping statements that would normally take months of diplomatic preparation. Over the years, some genuinely big policy signals have emerged from these, by the way, conversations. This time, reporters asked him about Greenland. And Trump basically said, "Greenland is dangerous right now. Russian warships are there. Chinese warships are there. The US is not going to sit back and watch." Then he pivoted straight to Denmark and dropped what might be one of the most insulting one-liners in recent diplomatic history. Can Denmark even defend Greenland? Their defense force there is basically dog sleds. More dogs than soldiers, if any. Technically speaking, Denmark does have a small defense force in Greenland. And yes, because it's the Arctic, dog sleds are actually used for patrols. Inuit communities use them, and the Danish military adapted to local conditions. Four-legged creatures are way more useful than four-wheeled vehicles. But turning that into your defense is just dog sleds is not exactly respectful, given the US and Denmark are both NATO members. They are brothers, but Americans overlook Danish guys as if they have more legs than other people. Imagine if someone said, "Oh, Aussies. Their defense is basically the thing with two big ears and one huge pouch." Even if it's said sarcastically, it's still not very respectful. If you're Danish, that comment is almost impossible to swallow. Trump doesn't really care. In his worldview, power equals respect, and small countries don't automatically deserve much of it. Only two people, Xi Jinping and Putin, deserve his respect. Naturally, people will immediately ask, wait a second. Denmark and the US are both NATO members. If the US takes Greenland, doesn't NATO basically explode? And that's where things get really serious. Because this isn't just about a frozen island. It's about alliances, rules, and the entire post-World War II order. But before we get there, let's rewind and talk about what Greenland actually is, because most people don't think about it very much. We introduced the frozen island in a previous video several days ago, but we need to do a recap here. Greenland is huge. Over 2 million square kilometers, roughly the size of Alaska, about 3 Texases, and 80% of its land is inside the Arctic Circle. It's the largest island in the world. We need to emphasize it again because one viewer challenged us several days ago, saying Australia is the largest, not Greenland. Nonetheless, Australia is a continent, not an island. So Greenland is the largest, not Australia, as the latter is just too big to be an island anymore. And yet, almost nobody lives on the largest island. Its population is about 58,000, of whom 88% are Inuit, 7% are Danish, and the rest are from other European nations. That means there are fewer people on the largest island than in a medium-sized apartment complex in China. When we talked about Taiwan's freedom pineapples in a video uploaded years ago, we mentioned that over 100,000 people live in a community in the Panyu district of Guangzhou City, southern China. Historically, Greenland was settled around 800 years ago by the Inuit people, who migrated from Eurasia across the Bering Strait thousands of years earlier. Genetically speaking, Inuit populations are actually closer to East Asians than to Europeans, which, jokingly, leads to the sarcastic argument. Greenland has ancient ties to China, although Beijing hasn't made that claim. If Donald Trump were Chinese, he would have long claimed Greenland as part of China, making China greater again. Later, Greenland became a colony of Denmark-Norway, and after those two split, Denmark kept it. In 1933, an international court officially ruled that Greenland belongs to Denmark. Today, Greenland is a self-governing territory. It handles its own internal affairs. Denmark controls defense and foreign policy. Greenland can legally vote for independence in the future. Before going any further, we need to answer one question. When did Trump start wanting Greenland? That didn't come out of nowhere. Back in 2018, Trump reportedly spoke with a billionaire friend, Ronald Lauder, heir to the Estee Lauder empire and a former schoolmate. Lauder told him, "If you really want to go down in history, expand American territory. Take Greenland. You'll be Mount Rushmore material." Trump loved that idea. In 2019, he publicly floated the idea of buying Greenland. Denmark's response was, "Absolutely not." The Danish Prime Minister said very clearly, "Greenland is not for sale." Trump got angry, cancelled a planned visit to Denmark, and then the issue faded away. Trade wars with China took priority, and his first term ended. Fast forward to 2025. Trump came back into office. And this time, he's not calling it a real estate deal anymore. Now it's national security, an excuse fit for him to do everything, including the capture of another sovereign country's head. His argument goes like this. Greenland sits on the shortest missile path between Russia and the US. China and Russia are increasingly active in the Arctic, with their submarines, warships, and military patrols. Therefore, the US must control Greenland before Russia and China control it. And unlike before, this time he's acting like he's serious. His vice president visited Greenland, reportedly without notifying Denmark in advance. Trump's son showed up to lobby locals. Rumors spread that the US might offer $10,000 to $100,000 per person, roughly $6 billion, to buy the islanders' approval to join the United States. And historically, America bought a lot of land. Louisiana was purchased from France. Alaska was bought from Russia. The US Virgin Islands were bought from Denmark, by the way, and so in Trump's mind, buying Greenland is totally normal, either from Denmark or from Greenland itself. Here's the uncomfortable truth. The US already has about 200 troops stationed in Greenland. They've been there since World War II, when Nazi Germany occupied Denmark, and the latter quietly handed Greenland's defense to the US. There's a long-standing defense treaty that gives the US massive privileges. US troops are under US law, not Danish law. The US can build bases, store weapons, and deploy forces simply by notifying Denmark. If the US really wanted to seize Greenland militarily, it wouldn't even need reinforcements. Denmark's local forces wouldn't stand a chance. Which is why Trump casually says, "I don't rule out military options." Seizing Greenland is much easier than capturing Maduro and his wife, a piece of cake. And yes, he sounds eerily similar to how keyboard warriors in the Chinese mainland talk about Taiwan. Beijing can take over Taiwan in 24 hours, and Washington can occupy Greenland in 24 minutes. But do Trump's reasons actually hold up? Here's where the logic starts falling apart. China is present in the Arctic, that is correct, but not remotely close to taking Greenland, even though some Chinese netizens say Greenland has been an integral part of China for thousands of years, maybe longer than the Chinese civilization itself. Russia isn't trying to seize it either. Its headache is NATO, not the Arctic. The US already controls Greenland's defense, and it even has a base there to monitor space activities, let alone those on the sea or in the air. The US could lease land, invest in mining, and build bases without owning the island itself. Even rare earth minerals, another Trump talking point, don't require sovereignty. When reporters suggested leasing instead of owning, Trump responded with pure Trump logic. "I don't like renting. Ownership is psychologically necessary." He talks about ownership like a Chinese father-in-law lecturing his daughter's fiancé, "You need to own a house and a car before marrying my daughter. Tenancy is not an option." And that's the key. It isn't a strategy. It is Trump's personal ambition. He wants history to remember him. Then, can the US actually buy Greenland? Legally, there is a pathway. First, Greenland votes for independence from Denmark. Then, it becomes a sovereign state. Finally, it voluntarily signs a treaty or association with the US. But here's the problem. 85% to 90% of Greenlanders oppose becoming Americans. Denmark provides around $700 million in subsidies each year. The islanders enjoy free healthcare and welfare without paying a penny, and more importantly, they don't worry about becoming homeless as Americans do. In the long run, climate change may make Greenland extremely valuable in the future. One local summed it up perfectly. Your government lasts for years. We think in terms of 1,000. Actually, Donald Trump only has 3 years left, even if he can finish his second term without surprises. Then comes the last question: what if Trump uses force? That is where things get explosive. Denmark is a NATO member. So is the US. NATO has rules for defending members against external attacks, but none for what happens if members attack each other. If the US invades Greenland, does NATO defend Denmark? Does NATO collapse? Does Europe choose Denmark over the United States? Or NATO chooses to be deaf and blind? Any answer is catastrophic. And remember, Trump has always disliked NATO. He's repeatedly questioned whether the US should stay in it at all. If the US uses force to take Greenland, it would shatter the post-war international system, a system the US itself created. No territorial conquest by force, the system says, and Trump wants to seize a territory by force. Respect for sovereignty, the system says, and Trump does not know what sovereignty means. Self-determination, the system says, and Trump always decides things for others. By breaking those rules, America suddenly looks no different from Russia, even worse. It is not better than North Korea, as South Korea is at least part of the Korean family. It has no excuses to blame China for taking over Taiwan, as even Trump himself says Taiwan is part of China, and it is up to Chinese President Xi Jinping how to handle the Taiwan issue. He only feels unhappy if Beijing unilaterally changes the status quo. Donald Trump does not care whether others are happy or not. Will President Xi Jinping care whether Trump is unhappy? If the US abandons Taiwan, Asia will gradually become Asians' Asia, no longer America's, which is devastating to its global dominance. And once that moral authority is gone, it's gone forever. No other country will believe what the US says. So will Trump actually take Greenland? No one knows. That's the problem. Trump is unpredictable. He talks big, so people only see his mouth. Sometimes he acts like a comic. Sometimes he seems like a normal person. But one thing is clear. If Greenland falls into the grasp of the United States by pressure, purchase, or force, the consequences won't be frozen at the Arctic Circle. They'll reshape NATO, the global order, and America's role in the world. And that's why this story matters a lot more than it sounds at first. So once again, will the US seize Greenland by force? The answer is still uncertain, as a normal person cannot foresee what a lunatic will do next.